but you have a gas tank, and then there's a line that runs out of that, and it has fuel in it, and it's flammable. I'm like, I would have had a fire going that they would have seen in DC. So we're bebopping right along. I'm like, man, these guys are full. No problem. And then we hit the, pickup sticks in the bubblegum forest. I'm talking tree over tree over tree.
And it's a collection of indie filmmakers. Some of them are much better looking than other ones. Come on, get a piece of this.
Down, when we sneak in, because we're thinking they're going to still be bedded in this one area, nothing, right? Houdini, Kaiser Sourcey, they're gone. I'm like, well, fudge. Generally, panic is what kills you in a survival situation. And I always use the analogy of my wife wants she wants a gun that'll shoot down trees, that doesn't make noise and doesn't kick. And they just don't have that.
Come on, Charlie. Tell us how you're doing it. Come on, man. How are you calling in those bulls?
I can't do it, dude. Yeti, bloody Yeti. Cut sleeve shirt, is that like a wife beater?
No, not quite.
Is it just you cut the sleeves off?
It's more redneck instead of white trash. So
someday I hope to be a redneck.
The sleeves are just...
Hello, alright. You're listening to the Gritty Bowman, home of gritty bow hunting films, interviews, tall tales, and a wee bit of manly boasting.
I'm South Cox, and you're listening to The Gritty Bowman.
Hey, this is Corey Jacobsen, and you're listening to The Gritty Bowman.
We born and raised outdoors, and you've been listening to The Gritty Bowman.
There you go.
I'm Casey.
And I'm Jordan.
And you're watching
The Gritty Bowman.
On this episode of Gritty Bowman, we meet with Corey Jacobsen of Elk 101.
If you like the show, please go to our website at grittybowman.com and subscribe to this podcast and tell your mates and pals about us. Do us a favour and please take a moment to leave us a rating or a review on iTunes or on our YouTube channel. Send your questions and podcast ideas to grittybowman@gmail.com. If you're listening to this on iTunes, you can see the video version of this podcast on our website at www.grittybowman.com.
All right, folks. Welcome to the Gritty Bowman podcast. We are here today with Corey Jacobsen. What is it? 7-time world elk calling champion, something like that. Qualified elk caller.
Ready to go elk hunting next week, yes.
And right now you're running Elk 101, right?
Correct. That's right.
Extreme Elk magazine was purchased and is no longer something you're working on. You still contribute a little bit, right?
Definitely, yeah. So Elk Hunter magazine, we merged Extreme Elk magazine with Elk Hunter magazine, and I'm still on the editorial staff there, and will contribute content there on a regular basis.
Okay, cool. So I'm glad I have you here today because I have a ton of elk hunting related questions, and since the season pretty much across the states is opening like this weekend or has already, I got some questions for you, and I'm just gonna go through a few right now, and I'm gonna fire them off, and if you could answer them in really good detail, that would be greatly appreciated. The first one is, where exactly are you hunting? And the GPS coordinates would be appreciated.
You have to be careful here, Brian, because I know where you and Anthony are hunting, so I could very easily.
My follow-up to that was, in case the GPS coordinates were a problem, off which road in which unit will you be spending most of your time? And where have you been seeing the biggest bulls, and how big are these said bulls, and will they be around the GPS coordinates given in question 1? Can you answer those?
I'm happy to answer that. Absolutely.
Actually,
yeah, there will be somebody that's upset with this, but it won't be me.
Yeah, don't give away my hunting spot. I think that's I'm just jokingly, I get those questions a lot. I get people coming to me and saying, "Hey Brian, where do I hunt? Where are you hunting? Where did you kill that last bull? Where have you killed most of your bulls?" And I found that I can pretty much elk hunt almost anywhere. That the elk are where the elk are.
For sure.
If you have the skill set to kill elk, you can do it most in most states and most units. Of course, the quality of elk hunting is better in different units managed for different uses. But my experience has been that it's not about the spot.
You know, there are honey holes. There definitely are places that I'm more comfortable going into and know that we're going to get into elk. And I think some people, you know, see that and they're like, if we hunt there, we're going to kill elk too. And it's like you said, it's more of being a successful elk hunter rather than having a successful spot, I think. And you know, I think a lot of these people that ask, and we get asked all the time the question, hey, what unit are you guys hunting in? Where's your favorite place to hunt? And I always, you know, I'll be as specific as the state, maybe sometimes. Sometimes I don't even say the state, but you know, and I finally started telling people, you know, those are things that I just don't share, and I hope, you know, I don't say that to offend you, but in an area, if I draw Unit 9 in Arizona, that's a once every 20-year type of a hunt. I'm gladly going to share exactly where I hunted, and I'll give names of water holes, all of that. But when it comes to, you know, public land, do-it-yourself, over-the-counter tags, those places are sacred.
Yeah, I agree. I've grown to the point where I just tell people that's top secret information, and if I tell you, I'll have to kill you. You know, that's it's a nice, easy response. You know, and I don't mean to offend anyone either, but you work pretty hard to understand your unit, to find where elk are preseason scout, and so it's sort of it's an awkward question. It feels like it's inappropriate. It's like asking, you know, a woman's age, I guess. You know,
it's almost one of those questions that crosses the ethics line.
Right, completely. Like Anthony, if you ask Anthony, so Anthony, where exactly did you kill that elk? It's like the hair on his neck stands up, the eyes get buggy wide, and he's like, it's like, I can't believe you asked me that. I can't believe you asked. You know, it goes to that extreme. I sort of expect
I like
the question.
competition.
Yeah,
I like competition most of the time, but not with I don't like company.
Yeah.
And when I go hunting, I would rather hunt an area that has 6 elk and no other hunters than hunt a place that has 600 elk and 3 other hunters. It's just, I don't like to run into other people when I'm hunting.
And that's exactly how Anthony is too. Like we hiked into this place. It was pretty remote. And on the way in, we bumped into some guys hiking out. And this is like at midnight, right? And he's like, how can that be? You know, and we talked about it for 30 minutes more on the hike in. And then we pumped into one more group up on this hillside. This is a pretty big unit. And we're in this canyon all by ourselves. You know, for the most part, we passed those guys miles back. For the next 2 days, all I heard about is how many people were in that unit. There was 2 groups, Corey. 2. And you'd have thought like half the state moved into that unit. So definitely.
People always ask, you know, do you call in a lot of other hunters, you know, and I don't.
Yeah.
And it's because I run away from other bugles. That's, you know, I like to be alone.
Well, I think what I wanted to get into today, though, you know, was elk hunting tactics, strategies, really get into that a little more, because back to the original point, I just wanted to make a point that the elk are where the elk are, and understanding a guy's location for where he hunts, that's only a small part of being successful in the woods each year elk hunting. And I think too often guys that haven't had that much success, they focus on finding that spot, the magic spot. And the reality is, I think there's a lot of great spots. I mean, but they're everywhere. If you apply the skills that you learn and the information that's out there, you learn and you apply that, you can find your own great spot and be very successful.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So with that said, I wanted to get into some questions that I had. One of them, what is the most important, when you're out there hunting elk, the most important
I love questions that start this way.
Yeah,
the number one.
It's the only question that matters.
That's right.
But there is something that's really important when you're elk hunting that you can't fake or get around or escape. What is it, Corey?
The most important thing you can't fake. You have to put effort into.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that's interesting. I'm spending a lot of time talking to my 12-year-old, trying to explain to him that if you want to get things, and this is a general in life, if you want something, you've got to put something into it. And I think elk hunting is definitely, the more you put into it, the more you're going to get out of it. You mentioned the spot's not the key. Mm-hmm. What is the key? What's the one thing that you need to be focusing on? Whew, that's a tough question. I don't know that there is. For me, I get on a kick and it's like, all right, it's physical condition. I've got to be able to run down the elk and keep up with them. And then it'll shift to, man, I haven't practiced my calls. I sound terrible. I got to start calling my shooting. I've got it. So it's all these different things. I think if I was to pinpoint one thing that will equate to success in the elk woods, it would be confidence.
Okay.
So how's that for a cop-out?
I like it. I like it.
You know, and I think the confidence covers all of those different aspects, but being confident in your abilities as an elk hunter. And if that's, you know, there's so many different methods and styles of elk hunting that for me to say you've got to be proficient on your calling, well, there's a lot of people that are way better elk hunters than I am that don't even carry a call in the woods with them. So it'd be hard to put it that, but whatever your style is, you've got to have confidence and know that when you step in the woods, the elk are in trouble.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, I'm like that. I just naturally, I like to consider myself sort of a irrational blend of confidence and not arrogance, confidence.
I was just going to say, I'm glad Anthony isn't here because I know what he would be saying right now.
Confidence and humility, like a nice healthy blend of both. Can you even say that?
I was going to say, can you bottle that up? Because I've never heard those two in the same sentence.
No, I agree though. Like with shooting, I when I first started archery hunting, I missed shots I should never have missed, and it was all about confidence. You know, when I pulled back on that bow, I was like, am I gonna, I think I'm gonna make a shot, and I didn't have, like, now when I pull back on an elk, it's like that thing's going down. There's a whole different feeling behind it, and it translates into success. It's just, and before, when there was doubt, it didn't. I had failures. So,
and I think that goes into calling, especially. You know, the questions we get asked in calling all the time is, I don't know what to say. In fact, I had a guy call me at work several years ago, and he had his phone on speaker, and he's like, "Can you hear the bull bugling?" I'm like, "No, I don't hear it." And he's like, "Well, what do I do? I've been calling to it for like 20 minutes, and it won't come in. What do I do?" And my first reaction was, hang up the stupid phone and go kill the elk. It's pretty simple here.
Yeah.
But for him, it wasn't that confidence in calling. He can do the staircase bugle, but what's going to bring that bull in? Or the question of, do I do it timid? Do I sound like a big bull? Is it going to scare the elk off? Those kind of questions that are going through 90% of elk hunters' minds. I think every time they put the bugle up to their lips, they're thinking, am I going to scare him away? And so having confidence and knowing that, hey, if I rip a bugle right here and that bull's 100 yards away, am I going to chase him away? I don't think so. I think he's coming in. That kind of confidence of knowing what to do and when to do it is important.
How do you get that? How do you get over those jitters and those fears and that how do you develop that confidence? Do you have any tactics or strategies you use, Corey?
Well, I've got a self-help book that I'm going to pitch here. No, it's one of those things that comes from experience. It's confidence creates success, and success creates confidence. So how do you get one before the other? I think it's just it comes through experiences. You learn from your failures, you build upon your successes, and it's nothing. You can learn, you can read books, you can watch videos, you can do all those things to learn about every aspect of elk hunting, except for that killer instinct that just comes from experience.
I have two thoughts that come to mind. I'm going to write one of them down while I talk about the other one so I don't forget. But so one of them is, I heard Corey Miller say this, and I realized I actually kind of did the same thing. He was telling Mark Brownlee, we were talking about hunting, and Mark's like, man, I get so nervous when an elk comes in, and I get angry. Like in the past, there are times where I've just gotten so pissed off that now I've broken through the lack of, the concerns and the fear and the fear, or I guess the lack of confidence that causes me to not take action, not be decisive, which is more harmful than acting wrong, right? No action is not going to get me anywhere.
Yep.
Hesitation, freezing, just now I make a decision, I go for it, right? Well, getting angry definitely had a lot to do with that. Remember last year I was calling in these bulls for Brownlee. They were charging in hard and fast, and I was like, oh, he's going to kill this bull. But Mark was, and he's not going to like me sharing this, but he is up in front of me about 60 or 70 yards, right in the path of this bull elk, and bull's coming in strong, and Mark has a little radio. You can use him in Oregon. And he's like, Brian, where do I go? What do I do? Where am I supposed to stand? I'm like, shut up and shoot the bull. And he's like, well, I'm not sure. What do I do? And I'm like, finally, I just tried to make him mad. I was like, Mark, quit being a sissy. Quit being a pansy. Get some guts and kill the thing. And then, I insulted his manhood a couple of times, and that kind of shook him out of his, I'll show Brian. I'll kill this bull. It kind of, resets the brain a little bit. And I find that I've done the same thing to myself, self-talk, when I remember I had missed an elk, and I had him in a water hole at like 40 yards for 10 minutes. And and I pulled back on that bull like 5 times, like, okay, do I shoot him here? No, let's wait till he moves just a little this direction or a little that direction. Long story short, I didn't shoot him, and I go back to camp, and Anthony's like, you did what? How come that bull isn't dead? And I'm like, well, I was waiting for this shot and then this shot. And then he's like, Brian, you had like 50 shots. They're all shots you can make. Why wait for a better one? You have one that will kill the bull that you can make. Why are you waiting for some other better shot? He's like, elk hunters will take the first available shot they have. If they can make it and they're confident in that shot, they're going to take that shot. They're not going to wait for this other quartering away, like big window, the perfect shot, right? He's like, they're going to, they're going to take the shot that they've got. And, he talked to me a little bit. I got really angry, basically, because what he said. And the next day, I just pulled back, and I'm like, I'll show Spencer. and I just, without hesitation, pulled back at the first available opportunity, shot this nice big bull. And it was a totally different mindset, So getting angry, I think, can really help overcome that. And I heard Corey Miller it's interesting because Corey and I had never talked about this, and Mark was saying, I don't know if I'll be able to, I don't know. Sometimes I get so nervous when I hear an elk scream and it comes in close. And Corey Miller said of XXX Archery, he goes, Mark, someday you're going to get so angry that you're going to pull it off. And I think that there's some truth to that.
Yeah, and it's all about channeling that adrenaline rush that we can't help. I mean, if you are elk hunting and a bull elk comes in and screams in your face at 40 yards and you don't just about wet yourself and get excited, you need to find another sport, because I've been doing it a long time and I still shake like a leaf when an elk comes in. It's just learning to manage that and to control it. I don't get angry, because when I get angry, I make really dumb mistakes. And so for me, I just channel that excitement into the thrill. Man, I'm in the middle of this incredible adventure. This is so much fun, and focus on what I have to do. But really, it comes. We have a saying in our camp. It's autopilot kill mode.
Yeah,
and it snaps, and we just go through the motion, and afterwards you stop and realize, holy cow, I'm shaking like crazy right here, and that's why we do it.
Well, and now I don't get angry anymore either. It's like, that experience has taken you to another level, right? You've done it so many times, and it just starts to feel like you just feel really comfortable in that position.
Yeah.
Excited. You know how it's going to end. The bull is going to be on the ground. It's
and that's that confidence. It's not an arrogance. It's just in your mind. You're playing out. You're already thinking about, how heavy the load's going to be.
And I think too, it's really neat to be there because you can appreciate the experience a lot. I don't stress out about wounding or hurting an animal or making a poor shot or anything. I know that I'm doing the best I can by that animal. So yeah, it's a good place to be. So
definitely. One thing you mentioned there, and not to keep dwelling on that, but you'd said you'd passed up several shots on that bull. I think that's great. And if people aren't comfortable with the shot, in no way are we saying to be aggressive and take a shot you aren't comfortable with or rush anything. But at the same time, as you progress and gain that experience, you'll recognize there were probably a lot of opportunities you could have capitalized on that you didn't. And, that comes into the frontal shot, whatever it is. If you're confident in it, do it. If you're not, don't do it. And that goes for a 30-yard broadside shot. If somebody's not comfortable shooting 30 yards broadside, don't force it. Yeah. Don't make something bad happen. Wait until something you're comfortable with comes along, and you'll recognize, and as you grow in confidence, you'll see a lot more opportunity.
Yeah, there's definitely a balance there to strike, and I kind of failed on that one. There were opportunities, shots I could have made, and chose to well, maybe he'll come 5 yards closer when I can make that 30-yard shot all day long. Yeah. And yet I'm trying to wait for a 25-yard shot. It's in my mind, basically, I think what I was doing was stalling because I was afraid of taking the shot. I wanted it to work out so well. And I think you can get in your head like that. So
totally.
That confidence, though, I think comes from getting out there and getting that experience. And it helps to have a significant other that worships the ground you walk on. That helps build confidence as well.
Really? My wife tells me she's here to keep me humble.
You probably need a wife like that. I need one that builds me up. Okay, so on the topic of calling in bulls, I had been listening to a podcast recently about using the Estrus call. And some of the guys on the podcast were like, I never use it, hate it, don't like it. Others were saying, I like to use it a lot. So a couple of questions for you. What are your thoughts on the Estrus call? When to use it, when not to use it? How often is it used? And what should it sound like?
Definitely. Yeah, and I'll preface all this. I'm not an expert. I am not the authority on anything. I found what works for me. And you mentioned, several guys debating what works, what doesn't. You'll find that any group of elk hunters you get together, there'll be some that bond together and aggressive calling is it, and others that are like, no, it's spot and stock, and all of the methods are great. So as I share what I'm sharing, it's not this is the authority on it, just this is my opinion. There are a lot of different sounds out there that people say, oh, that's the Estrus call, and I've heard everything from the and people like, oh, there's the Estrus scream or whatever it is. And I heard a sound about 20 years ago that I videoed, and I didn't know what it was for a year or two after that. And Steve Chappell actually has got some really good video of what we call the Estrus scream or the Estrus buzz, and it's just a nasally, raspy cow call. She's desperate. She wants to be bred right then, and you hear it if there's a cow separated from the herd that's in estrus and ready to be bred. It's not a sound you hear an awful lot out in the woods, though. So using it, the timing has to be right and all that. But we've had some really good luck with bulls that are hung up, have a couple cows, they're screaming their heads off but won't leave them. We'll throw out a couple estrus screams, and we've had good luck pulling those big bulls right away in a hurry. And so I guess I'll demonstrate what my rendition of it. But all I do, just using a diaphragm, I put it in and make a cow call. And then I make kind of a trumpet mouthpiece with my fingers. I don't know if you can see that there.
Yep, I can see it.
Put it up to my lips and just kind of buzz in it like a trumpet.
Almost like a lip sound. Ball?
It is. It's a lip ball on a cow call.
So the lips are together and you're like...
Yep. So that's the estrus buzz or the estrus scream that I've heard elk actually use. I've never heard. I've heard a lot of different sounds come out of an elk, but the ones that actually mean something to me, That's one of them, and the bulls know what it means.
Okay.
So I'll use it. I don't just go out there the 1st September and start doing Estrus buzzes or Estrus screams. But if I have a bull that's hung up, we called in a bull 2 years ago in Idaho, a really big bull that was up there with 2 cows up on the hillside and would not come down for about 40 minutes. He was locked in with those cows. The second I started doing the Estrus scream, you could hear his attitude change. You could hear him breaking things on the way down, and he came running down the hill to us. So it's one that works, and I definitely keep that in my bag of tricks.
Yeah, I heard recently I received the recommendation to go listen to Steve Chappell's video where they heard that, where they recorded it, and it was a sound that, again, I was like, whoa, this isn't very common. I've never really heard this before. But
in that video, you see the 2 bulls come running up the canyon behind it, fighting, trying to be the first one to that cow, and they know what it means.
Yeah, and I've heard, that's a sharp contrast to the sound you hear, like with a Primos hoochie, like a Primos. Yeah.
I've never heard elk do that. I mean, I've heard them maybe make a similar noise, but it's not when they're in estrus.
Because you have your hot lips call from Primos, and it's a pretty harsh sounding call. Yeah. And they're stacked on top of each other, and it sounds pretty not needy, just naggy, you know, and harsh. Like, it doesn't really sound like that would be a needy sound.
Yep.
And
you don't hear elk doing that, and that's a lot of. And I don't mean to pick on industry or anything, but a lot of the tactics that are out there in the industry are based on a product that somebody's trying to market.
Yeah.
And they say, hey, let's do this, and they work to a degree.
Yeah. I was going to say, I've used those and called in
totally a
number of raghorn bulls. I've not actually called in big bulls with that, to be honest. I will say we have called in a couple of 6x6 bulls with a similar sound, but we just used it a tiny bit, and it's lumped in with a bunch of other calling sounds. So I'm not sure that it was really but we have used it to call in young bulls. I mean, it's worked like a charm. As soon as we got on like a Primos Hot Lips 10 years ago, we had bulls just turn and walk straight to us 100 yards, right in. But
and that different sound, there's times I will throw everything I have at an elk and not get a response. I'll pick up an open reed call and blow on it once, and they turn their head and come running. So it's, there's that sound that bull wants to hear on that day. And if you can make that sound, it's going to work.
Yeah.
A prime example is the hoochie mama. I hate the hoochie mama. It's one dimensional, just, but I threw everything I had at a big bull one time in a controlled hunt. I was out hunting with a guy that had a super tag, and I was embarrassed. This bull would not respond to me. He was just walking away, not even interested. He pulled out the hoochie mama and started blowing. I said, give me that thing. I was about to toss it down the hill, and I'm like, you're going to completely ruin any chance we have. And so I sat there, and I was trying to play Mary Had a Little Lamb on the hoochie mama as this bull is walking up to his bedding area 400 yards away. He came unglued and ran down the hill to us. And I literally was just going, on the hoochie mama. And the bull, there was something in there that the bull liked, and he came running. And so, there's no right answer here.
So when it comes to calling, that's a very good point. Like, how do you, because I've heard some guys recently on some podcasts talk about calling and say, you know what? Big bulls, you can't call in big bulls, really. There's just a few handful of people in the world who can really pull it off. They do it every year. They bugle in big 400-inch bulls, in Arizona. But for the most part, they can tell when you're a giant bull. A bull can tell if you're a person or not. They can, or they don't come to calls for whatever reason. So you better find a different tactic.
Right.
What do you think about that? You told me you're always looking for a bull who's ready to die that day. And by that, you mean a bull that wants to play, that will come in to calls. Yep. That for you, the excitement is calling in a bull.
Absolutely. And I like big bulls too. It's not about score for me, but I want to hunt a mature bull. And
You call in big bulls, right?
Well, we like to, yes. It's challenge. It's definitely more challenging, and we get it all the time. You call too much. You can't call in big bulls. You've got to spot and stalk, and you look at the guys who are consistently getting it done, killing big bulls. The majority of them are spotting and stalking. But I'd also throw out there the majority of them are also hunting on special tags or something like that. You come to Idaho and hunt on an over-the-counter unit and go out there and let's talk about 400-inch bulls after your experience there. It's not going to happen. So, when we say we're calling in big bulls, for me in Idaho, a 340 bull is an absolute giant. Throwing some scores out there in that ballpark, they don't get a whole lot bigger than that. You go to Arizona, you have a lot more. It's a different story. There's a bigger class of older animals there. So
now you hunted Arizona though, right?
I've hunted it twice. I've actually been there on 3 or 4 hunts, but I myself have had a tag twice in Arizona.
And you called in bulls, or did you spot and stalk them?
We called. I do not spot and stalk, and I probably should. I would be a much more well-rounded hunter if I did. But I cannot. If a bull is there for whatever, there's something in my mind that says you have to call to that bull, and I do. And if he lifts his head and leaves, he leaves, and I go look for another one. But in Arizona, we hunted a unit that was not a prime unit. I drew it with 3 points, and we called in a bull, legitimately called in this bull. We didn't just get between him as he was going to his bedding area or whatever. We called him out of the bottom of a canyon, and he came in for probably 400 or 500 yards and came into 45 yards. I didn't get a shot at him, everything on video, and he was killed in the rifle season later on and scored 417. The bull that I shot, we called in, and we called him in twice. We called him in 3 days before, and it was in thick brush, and I never got a look at him, but he had a very distinct bugle. He came in 3 days later to the calls, and I shot him, and he scored 390. So my personal experience has been, yes, you can call in big bulls, and it's no different than calling in any other bull. They're more wary. That comes with age and experience, but they still have the same emotions that you can trigger. You have to get in close and do all that, but I love calling big bulls, and I know there's a bunch of guys out there right now that are spot and stalk guys. Like, I guarantee if you come and hunt with me, you won't be able to call in these bulls, and I'd love a shot.
So it's very interesting too, because you have a lot of, you have guys that are on both sides of the fence. Some from in your camp saying, you can do it all day long. Do you think that your skill as a caller has a big part in that, or because you obviously have done well in like the elk calling challenges, championships, is that your experience, that you've got to be that good of a caller to make it happen? Or how good of a caller do you need to be to consistently call in bull elk, I guess is my question.
So there's 2 questions there in that. You have to be a good caller to call in big elk, and then how good of a caller do you have to be to call in elk? I've been a good caller. What I consider, I've been able to replicate elk sounds for a long time. I have not been a good hunter for a long time, and there's a big difference. I don't think you have to be a champion caller to call in any elk, big elk, little elk, anything. I think it comes with knowing what to say and when to say it. There are certain sounds that you need to make in a bugle or in a cow call that will catch the attention of that elk. But I've hunted with guys that cannot call to a judge. To a judge, they'd be like, yeah, you shouldn't even be on the stage, but they kill big elk every year. I've been with guys that sound just as pretty as an elk and have never killed an elk or struggle to kill elk. So I don't think it's a matter of sounding like an elk necessarily, or being a great caller all the time to call in elk, especially big elk. But again, it comes back to that question you asked at the beginning: is there one thing? Well, that's one more thing that the better you are, the better your chances are going to be. You're going to have more of an advantage.
It's really interesting to hear guys' different, strategies for killing elk. And I just heard Zach or Bohe. What's his? It was on the Cody Rich Outdoors podcast. I heard him on there, and that was a really cool podcast, and to get their perspective was neat. It's a little different than my own, right?
Sure.
But it was cool. I heard Dan Evans on the Sharp Sticks podcast do a couple. I thought his insight was fascinating. He's someone who doesn't call ever
At all, yeah.
and so much.
Rarely.
Yeah.
Where he's hunting those big bulls out in the open, stuff like that, he doesn't use calls. And I know Dan's a great example because Dan, he started hunting. He cut his teeth the same way we do, the over-the-counter, North Idaho, Northwest Montana, brushy, thick. You don't spot and stalk in those areas.
Yeah.
You can get in there and listen to bugles, but you still have to use calls to a degree to get in on those elk and keep tabs on them. And with wolves, it makes it more difficult. They aren't as vocal anymore. So Dan's a great example of someone who's done both sides, and there's definitely wisdom there in listening to what he has to say. I disagree. Personally, I love the call, and I can't give him up. He's gave him up, and his results speak for themselves. He kills big elk.
Well, on that note, one of the favorite ways that we like to kill elk and have been doing for a while now is we call a lot. Anthony and I both, we're not like going to win any championship or anything, but we can replicate enough, herd sounds, bull elk behavior, glunking, raking, and branches breaking, that you put it all together. I hear Anthony down the ways from me making all those sounds, and I swear to you, it's an elk. I mean, it sounds really good, like it's a herd or it's a bull, and he's pissed.
Yep.
The emotion he puts behind it, and then I try to do the same thing when I'm calling. It sounds pretty legit, especially at 70 yards. It's like
right.
Wow, and and we both do it to the point where the elk just get more and more excited, more and more angry, and we just keep working them, until they've had it, and then you can hear them coming in.
Yeah,
our sort of. One thing that we've done for a long time is we get the shooter pretty far from the caller, though. We've been doing that for years, where the shooter kind of, stalks in as close as he can get while the caller is still, 60, 70 yards back. And that bull is so busy screaming at him that it's easier for me, like if I'm the shooter, to sneak in closer and get real close, and the bull seems more likely to come into the call when we're there.
Yep.
Now, I've heard Phelps say this a few times, and a few others saying that sometimes that's too far away, and the bull will herd up the cows and then they'll leave. And they recommend getting as close as you can to the herd and then just let it go, let it rip. I mean, what would our strategy be better? If we tried to stay as quiet as we could to get in position and then just attacked.
Right.
I mean, what is your preferred strategy in that situation?
So there's two different situations going on there. I call it the hybrid, where you're using a call back behind, but the shooter out front is very mobile. So in that situation, the shooter is trying to get into the elk. And the other situation where like Jason's talking, and my go-to sequence is more of a static. We're trying to bring the elk into a setup. So in that case, if I want that elk to come to me, I want to get as close to him as I can. So the caller really pushes the envelope and gets close. And in that case, the caller needs to be inside 120 yards, 150 yards. You aren't going to get a shooter 60 yards out in front because he's going to be in shooting distance already. So a lot of times we're only 30 yards separated between the caller and the shooter. And, we're just on that verge. If we move any closer, that elk's going to know something's there and either hear or see something. So we push in as close as we can get and then set up. And then, it's full attack mode hitting him. And you mentioned something a minute ago, the word emotion. And I really feel more than being a good caller or anything, you've got to put emotion in your calls. And that's the key for my calling strategy, is triggering that emotion in the elk. And that's what, in my opinion, that's what elk go off of. They don't speak a language. They don't have all these different go-to sounds that they use to communicate their feelings. They use their emotion to communicate that a feeling. And for an elk, they're simple-minded. A bull elk has two emotions in September. He wants to breed and he wants to fight.
Yeah.
And if you can play to one of those two emotions and convince him, hey, I'm a cow that needs bread, or I'm a bull that's getting close and I want to fight you, trigger those emotions, and you've got a bull in your lap pretty quickly.
Yeah, I've got this little video of Anthony joking around where he's like, "You got to put a little passion in your calling."
You do.
And the elk are calling to the ladies, and they need to feel that manliness, and stuff. And there's a lot of truth to that, though. I mean,
Yep.
there's certainly when you like, especially like with cow calls, I talked to Ty Stubblefield about this. Ty claims to be the world's sexiest cow caller. Like he can just make the most soft.
If there
and
is a
sweet
title
sounds.
for Ty that uses the world's greatest and sexiest in the same sentence, it would probably have to be cow sounds.
That's right. So I found that the the putting that emotion into the calling is actually a lot easier than you think. Maybe if you don't have a lot of experience with it.
Right. And it's easier than mastering the perfect sounding bugle.
Yeah.
Or the perfect sounding cow call. Putting that emotion, just expressing to the bull what you want him to feel.
Yeah, I've heard like with cow calls, making a needy sound, rather than like a nagging sound.
Yeah.
And you can kind of feel it, or you kind of get a feel for that when you make those when you do those tones, and it's universal. It's like we as animals, humans, we kind of can sense the difference between needy and nagging, or annoying, right?
Absolutely.
There's a feel or a tone that comes from that, and when you're doing your calling, I just try to make those kind of sounds that feel right to me,
Yep.
So,
and I think about what am I trying to communicate to the elk? What's going to bring him in close? And then I put myself in another elk's shoe. He's thinking I'm an elk. He's not thinking I'm a hunter up there trying to convince him that I'm an elk. He's thinking there's an elk up there.
Yeah.
What do I need to do as an elk to convince that other bull to come in? And you simplify things pretty quickly there when you start thinking like that.
So with that strategy you're using where you get up close, 30 yards or so, what do you do? Like, do you do very many cow sounds, or is it all bull sounds?
So my go-to, I want to fight. If that bull comes in looking for a cow, typically he's coming in a little more cautious. He's not charging it. And I'm saying this definitely isn't always the case, but typically when a bull comes into cow calls, they're approaching a little more slowly. They're looking for that cow. They're scanning, trying to find the cow. When you trip the trigger inside of a bull and that adrenaline just rushes through him and the testosterone pumps into him and his eyes roll back and he starts seeing red, he's running over trees to get to you. And that's what I want that bull to do. I want him coming in with his guard down. All he wants to do is find that bull that he's ready to stomp on and get in a fight with. So I use bugles primarily, but I use a cow call to get the bull to respond. And that's important. I feel it's important to get that bull to talk first, because then if he talks, I can issue the challenge to him. If I bugle first and I'm close, he can immediately challenge me, and then he's put the ball in my court and saying, you need to come to me. And he waits there, and pretty soon he's like, that's what I thought, you're all talk, and he leaves. I'll use a cow call to get him to respond, and as soon as he does, I hammer him with the challenge, and then I've put it in his court and said, come down here, buddy, let's fight.
Okay, so explain that a little more. I've heard you say that before in one of the DVDs. Go back and do that. Say that again. So what you're saying is you're closing the distance, right? You know there's a herd there. You either spotted them or you heard them in the canyon. You know they're there. So you sneak in as quietly as you can. Get as close as you can. When you've hit that point where you're like, okay, I can't really get any closer without risking bumping cows or scaring the bull or maybe wind or whatever it is.
Right.
Then you stop. And right there, you do a couple soft cow calls. Is that what you do?
So we get set up first. I mean, we get in there and say, okay, this is where we want the bull to come into. We've got shooting lanes, all of that. The collar goes back 30, 40 yards, just to a point where that bull has to come into the shooter's lane before he can see where the collar's at. And so sometimes you can get away with 20 yards just on the backside of a ridge. Sometimes you got to get back 60 yards or so. Just you want that bull to get to a point where he's close enough to shoot before he stops and says, I should be able to see the collar.
Right.
So we get all set up.
I should be. It's not going to work if he can stop and look at where the sounds are coming from and there's no elk there.
Yeah.
So over the side of a ridge or something, if you're on the front of the ridge and your buddy's just on the other side 20 yards, then he'll come right up to that 20 yards.
He's got to look over the ridge to see.
Yep. Okay.
So we always set up
Yep.
just on the front side of it, collar on the back side, make him come up there. So once we find a good setup like that, We're close. And when I say close, it's very terrain dependent.
Yeah.
We get as close as we can. And we've lucked out and got within 60 or 70 yards sometimes, and then it's a slam dunk.
Yeah.
And other times it's 250 yards, and you got to work it a little more. So we get close, the caller's back behind, and then the caller just lets out a cow call. Just a simple cow call to get the bull's attention. Once the bull responds, as soon as he responds, and no matter what he responds with, the caller hits him with the challenge bugle, and it's got to be immediate. In fact, we usually cut him off and just put that aggression, that emotion into it. And, you know, I know a lot of people are listening, you're like, I've heard this before, you know, but this is my go-to sequence. That's what I use, and it's not, I'm not trying to sell a product to do it. It just works. It's simple, and it works. So.
Yeah, I've heard that. I heard another podcast, if you can't tell, I've listened to a few. There's one with, it was Sharp Sticks, and I forgot the gentleman. It was like episode 2 or 3, where he said the same thing. You get in there close, you do a cow call, the bull hears that cow call, and then he'll bugle and you cut him off. You've now challenged him. So he comes to you. Versus the other way, what is your experience there? You just bugle straight off.
The other way, you know, when everybody says you can't call in elk with bugles because they'll just bugle and run. They'll get their cows and they'll leave. And I agree. If you do it the standard way, the way I used to always do it, they bugle and run. They leave. And that is, you're going in, you get close, you let out a bugle. Well, close gives you a little bit more of an advantage, but no matter what, if you let out a bugle first, you've announced your location. There's a bull here. You catch the bull off guard, whatever it is, he can immediately issue a challenge to you and say, all right, you've got too close to me. I want to fight. Come up here and fight. And he stands there and waits. And you wait 90 seconds and let out another bugle, and he challenges you again and says, no, quit talking, get up here and fight about it. And after 2 or 3 of those, he's like, yeah, that's what I thought. You're all talk. He grabs his cows and he starts going over ridge to ridge, and you run behind him at 300 yards bugling. He stops and bugles, and you wait, and you're like, he's coming back in, and pretty soon he bugles farther off, and
done that a million times.
Play that game. So I like to make sure and put the ball in his court and say,
how does that put the ball in his court?
Me challenging him.
Yeah, how does that work? Like, how did you challenge him versus the other way? Didn't you challenge him when you just bugled straight off the bat?
I don't think so. I think you alerted him to your presence.
Okay.
And then he challenges you. So
when you go in and you cow call and he calls back, he's like talking to the cow, right? He's like,
he is. And I mean, you had buddies in college, I'm sure, that, you know, they went out looking for ladies and hit the bars, and look at the ones that got in fights. Why did they get in fights? Because they were always running their mouths, and they were aggressive. And so put yourself in that situation. Here's a bull elk talking to a cow.
Right.
And he doesn't know there's another bull around. He's like, you know, hey, it's September. I'm a bull. You're a cow. What do you think about coming up and hanging out with me for a while? And then before he even gets done hitting on this cow, this bull steps out. This other dude steps out and says, don't be an idiot. This is my girl. And if you want to talk to her like that, why don't you come down here and we can talk about it?
It's almost like
man to man.
It's almost like you're saying, I've got a girl down here, and if you want her, you got to come and get her.
Yep. And
the other way, you're just saying, hey, I want some of your girls. And he's saying, well, come and get them.
Totally. Yeah. And there's a communication that goes on there in that emotion that it's a very different dialect and a very different conversation when you bugle first.
Okay.
Just the whole.
So when you're in there and you're close and you do those cow calls, what do they sound like? Can you do some?
Just a standard. I just do a simple cow call.
Just a regular cow call.
Regular cow call. 1 or 2, 3 of them, just whatever. Just you want to make sure he hears it and knows there's a cow down there.
So then he sounds off like, whoa, cow, I'm up here. And then you cut him off with a bugle. And that triggers a different response. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
I don't think we've really ever done that, to be honest. I think we've gone in really close. And now we're in his back pocket, and we're like, we're here. And then we bugle like this ornery, pissed off bull sound.
And it works. I'm not saying that doesn't work.
A lot of times, though, what we get is him screaming right back, but he does not come in. And a lot of times he circles up the cows and leaves over eventually. And we couldn't get any closer because now he's watching all the time.
Yep. And he's moving. And the cows are now all watching. If you can get that bull to break away from his cows and come in, that's the best situation you can hope for.
So another question on that note, when you get those cows to break away and come in, what is it that you're doing? Like, what can you do to increase the odds of them breaking away? Is the time of day going to help? Because I've heard you talk about this. Okay, so in the morning, let's say they're feeding really early in the morning, first thing. Generally, that's usually what they're doing, right?
Yeah.
And then after they're fed up, they're going to go bed down somewhere for the day because it's hot, or it's daytime. They're going to go lay low somewhere. Is that pretty accurate?
Yeah, and there's really one of the things I think is really important to becoming a successful elk hunter is understanding just some basic elk habits. And we put it all together and we see what they're doing, but sometimes we don't understand why. Elk typically, and this is going to, again, this is a typical, it's not the 100% of the time.
Yeah.
You get in Colorado above timberline, sometimes they switch up their habits and they actually feed up at night instead of coming down. But typically an elk is going to feed in a lower elevation than where they bed. And there's a reason for that. They come down the mountain when the thermals are coming up because they can smell any danger in front of them. These elk, every second of the day, are just trying to stay alive, and they utilize the wind, they utilize their noses primarily to help them stay alive. So most of their actions throughout the day coincide with thermals.
Right.
So as they're coming to feed, they're coming down the mountain in the evening after, before the thermals have switched, when the thermals are still coming up, they have the thermals in their face. They can smell any danger in front of them. They get to their feeding area, which is in a lower elevation, about the time that the wind switches. And the wind switches, now it brings the thermals down. So all night long as they're feeding in the meadow or whatever, they're able to smell danger that's up above them.
So on the way to the meadow, the wind is in their face. And after they get to the meadow that evening and they're eating, the wind's still in their face.
It's in their favor, yep.
Yeah, it's coming downhill now. So if you try to get in front of them on their way down, they're going to smell you.
They are.
If you try to get in front of them on their way back, they're going to smell you.
Absolutely. So that creates a real problem for an elk hunter for a couple reasons. The morning comes, before the wind switches, those elk turn and they head up the mountain to their bedding area. The thermals are in their face coming down the mountain. The sun warms up the hillside, the thermals switch about the time they get to their bedding area, and it brings up all the scent, all the danger that's behind them.
This podcast has been broken into multiple parts to make the downloads faster. You have reached the end of a part, but not the end of the complete podcast. So please check your Gritty Bowman library for the next part of this podcast.
Bollocks.